I've been enjoying a television show, The Assassination of Gianni Versace, an American crime story. And I think the opulence, just the amazing, bizarre wealth, the curiosity of seeing how the uber-rich are here, I don't even know what one would call Gianni Versace. He's just an enigma. But the nature of just these extremely opulent places where these people produce this stuff is just extraordinary. And obviously, the assassination is really an account of Andrew Cunanan and his very strange proclivities. I knew about Cunanan probably from the point where Versace was assassinated on, but to see the level of detail and just the nature of the other people that he killed before he got to Versace is really very curious. It really is just such a lavish presentation. You very rarely see these kind of things done as well as it was done. I'm pretty positive about the previous version, O.J. Simpson, the O.J. Simpson, An American Crime Story. I thought that was done pretty well as well. But this is just one up from that. It's just considerably better and more vibrant. And it's interesting because I didn't realize as I was watching it through Netflix, but I didn't realize as I was watching it whether or not the cuss words, like it didn't feel to me that it was clearly American television, that had been heavily censored and these kind of things. It seemed pretty vibrant within the genre. The acting is interesting. The guy who they have playing Versace is one of my favorite actors as well. And he's played so many other roles that I've liked him, and he just has this face which seems to be... But he actually looks really much like Versace. Far more than he looked like, Carlos the Jackal and the various other roles that I've seen him in. But yeah, it is interesting to see this thing played out. And with regards to my only Versace-like thing, I've had an interesting experience this week associated with letting go a couple of miniature painters. To say a couple is not really true. Well, they are a couple. One, the male, I wouldn't say husband, the male partner is just a really kind of curious character. And his wife was his broker, or his, what's the terminology here? Who would be his wife if they were married? Like, common law wife, I think is the term. I've lost all these beautiful English Australian terms living in the US. Anyway, so this gentleman and his partner I have been working with for more than a year now, and he has quite a reasonable rate. I mean, his rate is high by American standards, but not high by European standards. But at the same point, his work is curious, and I'll talk a little bit more about this. He and I and his partner were in regular communication. In fact, when I went out to New Jersey, I met them for dinner and took them out to a steakhouse and paid dinner for them and had a long chat with them. So we were pretty communicative close. But the main problem was the first parcel of his work. You get these miniatures. I like metal miniatures, so I send metal miniatures to painters. They paint it and they send it back. The first parcel was with some larger miniatures that had broken up in the mail. The parcel hadn't been wrapped particularly well. And so these bits broke off and then went through the parcel and did a bunch of damage. So the first lot of his stuff turned up with a bunch of damage. And it was just like, ugh. And it was at the period of time we were having the electrical work done as well. So I've actually lost a number of the explicitly broken parts. I don't know where they are. They're together with my Windows laptop and a bunch of pillowcases my wife especially made for me, all of which is still lost from the electrical work. We have a bunch of stuff that hasn't been found since the electrical work was done, and these broken miniatures were part of that. So anyway, I then went to the East Coast and had a meal with them, what have you, and I said, let's just work past this broken miniature thing. And I employed the husband primarily, and then I started employing the wife. Now, the wife picked her rates, and I thought, well, that's comfortable. The husband has his rates. She is still about twice as expensive as the next miniature painter that I employ, but in the US at least. But, that is a thing. So she's sent me back a quote for some more work, and that was fine. And I found some more miniatures, and I thought, well, some of these miniatures are eclectic. She can paint them, and, the husband the male partner can paint the other miniatures, and all fine. So I sent them off. And they sent me a new bill of work where she was charging exactly the same amount as her male partner, which is very curious. And she was basically doing understudy painting, which is doable. So she would do all the base coating and all the underneath painting, and then he would come in and do the details. So I was a bit taken aback because originally I was sending like a third of the figures to be painted by him, and now I was getting full rates for all of them. Then I received the second parcel of their work, and it was even more badly damaged than the first parcel. It was so badly damaged, in fact, they'd included... I mean, it just was clear that they had no background in sending miniatures through the postal service at all, which is kind of what I suspected from the first lot. But the second lot was just really, really bad, like worse than the first lot. And actually the extent of the damage was such that I just packed them away and moved them on. And I've been relatively critical associated with this miniature painting thing that is going on currently. The high-end folk I weeded down. I had maintained this fellow. I maintain a fellow in Spain. I have a guy locally who's not in anywhere close to the rates that this fellow on the East Coast charges. Nowhere close to the rates of the fellow in Spain. But the fellow in Spain is really a philosopher. He's a kind of painter philosopher. I've purchased a couple of his videos. He talks about aesthetics and lighting and symmetry, and you get the sense that this guy is a polymath, and I really do enjoy working with him. And my hope is to continue to send him, occasional figures and get them back. Because when he paints, he takes it to a completely different level. So with him, I don't mind commissioning figures. Still not astronomical prices, but considerably more than I pay for painters in the US. But I was so completely distraught by receiving this broken parcel. And my day-to-day life is not particularly romantic. I go to work, I have a bunch of problems, and I come home. So unwrapping the miniatures is a thing that I do very, very periodically, and to get this parcel of just mangled stuff really made me, viscerally not happy. My stomach turned, and it was just very upsetting to me, because I know these people, I've had a meal with them and this kind of stuff, but I clearly cannot continue to get work from them, because they just don't understand the whole nature of if you can't get the miniatures back painted, then you're not actually painting miniatures. So I had this whole thing where, I explained the situation. The first time I received the broken miniatures in the mail, it was so bad I could tell because the box rattled, which is never a good sign. So I actually unwrapped the box on video. The video cut out technical difficulties, what have you. But I was able to get out the broken miniatures and show them what had happened. So I thought, at least with the second box, they might have wrapped things more tightly, or at least learnt from their mistakes. And not only had they not learnt, they'd done things worse. So I had to walk away. I sent an email just asking them to send everything back, because they had a bunch of my stuff, which I'd obviously given quotes for. And they have deposits, and who knows what happens to that. I don't really care at this stage. I just want myself psychologically rid of this circumstance. And it's interesting actually thinking about the Versace show in contrast to this thing with miniature painting. I'm really at the stage where I'm almost wrapping up the miniature painting. As I look around, that's not the case. But as I look around more practically, there's a small set that's going to be sent on. I found some American Civil War stuff, which I'm thinking will probably only get the Union folks painted, but realistically I'll probably also get the Confederate folks painted as well, and just get that done. And then basically I'm done. There's a few small little bits and pieces, but I think this is a time where it just needs to go back in my shelving, and I can go back to doing my other work, which currently is almost exclusively around Noble Ape and music. Obviously this podcasting thing is there too. I'm going to experiment with this idea of creating a podcast which is a murder mystery podcast around Stone Ape. So folks who are familiar with Stone Ape know that it's an audio podcast that went on for about 6 years minus about 18 months. There's a lot of audio in there, and there's a lot of paradoxes and really curious things. If you listen to it critically, you can create a series of different interesting vignettes. And my aim is to paint these vignettes with the view that I've been listening to NPR, and NPR recycles podcasts. So my feeling is if I can make a daily podcast out of parts of Stone Ape, run it for about 40 weeks, and then restart it and re-record various interstitial parts of it, then I have a functioning podcast that can go on for years and generate a listenership without the standard hands-on every week additional audio approach, although I'm going to be recording new audio periodically for it. and just see if that thing can be a functioning organ, very similar to, This American Life and these kind of podcasts, where they're constantly recycling audio, and see what will happen to that thing. It's very interesting taking an existing body of work and reposing it, and that is something that's taking quite a bit of time. But like I say, I've got musical tracks, I've got this thing, and then with Noble Ape, I'm creating what I'm calling Noble Ape I/O, which is Noble Ape with JSON. JSON is a means of, it's basically a file format. It's a format of data, but providing aspects of the Noble Ape simulation in real time in JSON through a web server with the view that the client, the simulation client, then becomes a consumer of this data. And the first step of this is just to get good I and O, good input and output with JSON. And that is a relatively simple format. But the first part is writing a JSON parser that I can then connect at various points in the simulation and decouple, for want of a better term, aspects of the simulation so this thing can be put, large portions of it can be put in the cloud. And then it becomes a far more interesting kind of community observation problem. And anyway, I've bought the domain, thankfully, organized all that stuff, and that hopefully will take shape in the next couple of months. So all these things are running in parallel. This is where my energies need to be now, not with regards to very curious Versace-like experiences.